Good afternoon. I wanted to spend a little bit of time reviewing the guidelines for the BIP project and the rubric and making sure that everyone's clear about what the expectations are for this project and how it's going to be evaluated. If you click on the Behavior Intervention Change Plan tab in our course folder, you'll pull up the screen and you'll see the BIP guidelines and you'll see the associated rubric. Remember that you're going to be doing a presentation in class. Plan on no more than 6 to 7 minutes for going through your project. So that means that you're not going to be able to discuss every single detail that's included in your written report, but you're going to need to really select the highlights and talk about what you learned from the project and how you would use that in the future. So as we click on the BIP guidelines and pull that up, it'll download to your computer, and you'll see there the reason why you're doing a behavior change project. I think most of you are working with one individual. If you're working with a small group, that's something that can be very powerful, but will require an even more detailed analysis of the work that you will do. Remember that for this project, I'm asking you to isolate one behavior that you're going to address for intervention. While often in a BIP, we are addressing multiple behaviors, the purpose of this project to give you experience really measuring and recording behaviors and using the tools that we've been talking about this semester in order to create an intervention plan. And I think the most effective way to do that is by concentrating on one behavior that you're going to change. I've had conversations with a number of people in our class, and one of the things that I keep telling them is choose something that will really make a big difference. If you were going to choose something that you thought would make the biggest difference in the life of the person you're working with, start there, okay? Remember that you need 3 to 5 data points for your baseline condition. That is before you start intervention. So remember, at baseline, we measure the behavior with no treatment in place. Business as usual, okay? And then we begin to intervene and collect data during what we call our treatment condition. And we want to be able to see if what the data that we're gathering during treatment is different from that we gathered at baseline. If it is, then that tells us that our intervention is working, okay? You have to graph the data that you collect and then submit it in your written report. In terms of your presentation, because you're only going to have 6 to 7 minutes per person for presenting, you're going to need to make sure that you identify only the most important things that you learned or that influence the effectiveness of your project and share those with the class. But in your written report, you need to be sure that you're including and responding to all of the questions identified in the guidelines. You are more than welcome to do that by numbering, sections of your paper similarly to the way they are recorded on this piece of paper. First, give us a general description of the problem and purpose of the plan. So why are you doing this? And what impact do you expect it to have? You need to describe your subject. That's part 2. Make sure you use initials or pseudonyms. We don't want to identify any one of your students or anybody you're working with by name. At a minimum, you need to include the person's age, their grade if they're in school, their race, ethnicity, their language status. That means, are they a native speaker of English, or do they also speak one or more additional languages? Their strengths and their needs. Because remember, we always operate from a position of strength, and it's always important to know what individual strengths are so that we can build upon those. For number 3, you're going to describe the setting in which the plan is implemented. Please remember that you need to be in a position for this plan to directly observe the behavior you're targeting. So the setting in which you implement should be one in which you have some presence. And if you have questions about that, please let me know. You're going to explain the behavior you have chosen to target and why. So again, why did you select that particular behavior for intervention? What impact do you expect changes in that behavior to have on the life of that individual? You should label your target behavior so clearly that someone who has never had any interaction with the person you're working with could come in and observe and be able to say, yes, I saw that behavior occur, or no, I did not. So it needs to be very, very specific. Remember, avoid using those words like never, always, and constantly, and make sure that if you're using words like tantrum, that you're describing exactly what that looks like. So be as specific as possible in describing that target behavior. In the baseline phase, you're going to identify a way of measuring numerically the behavior that you see. So please go back to the sections in your book that talk about measuring behavior. You may be doing frequency counts. You could be doing interval recordings. You could be measuring latency. There are a number of ways to measure behavior. But in the end, you should be able to state a numeric value that represents that behavior. So it can't just be something that you record in terms of words or general impressions. And then you're going to describe how your rationale essentially for determining how you were going to measure the behavior, the target behavior. Include an ABC analysis chart. So at that point, you are going to look at what occurred immediately before you observed that behavior and what environmental consequences were evidenced afterwards. One of the things I've noticed in some of your work is that you have a tendency to describe the function of behavior as the consequence. So for instance, you say the behavior served an escape function for the student, or the student escaped doing their work as a result of the behavior. That's really not the consequence, that's the function. The consequence is what occurs immediately after that behavior is exhibited. So if you have questions about that, you need to ask me. And describing this baseline phase, you need a lot of detail. You need a short-term objective, one sentence, and that should include a condition, a behavior, and a criteria. So for instance, given a self-monitoring checklist, the student will reduce the number of times they call out during reading instruction to no more than one in each 30-minute period by April 28th, 2016. That's just one example. There are many others. But again, make sure that you tell under what circumstances or what supports are you providing to change that behavior. That's the condition. The behavior that you expect to be exhibited, and how you're going to determine whether or not the student meets your objectives. So again, that measure of behavior that you'll be able to identify. We talked about this in class, but try to be realistic in terms of the short-term objective that you set. You've had, not even an entire semester to work on this project. And so remember, if the child or the individual is exhibiting this behavior quite frequently, 3 weeks later, they're not likely to be completely, for that behavior to have been completely extinguished. So be realistic in terms of what you establish. For your intervention, describe in detail what you did to support the individual in meeting your objective. So it can be any number of things. I've seen students using token economies. I've seen students using behavior contracts. I've seen students using lots of different kinds of reinforcers to encourage students to engage in appropriate behavior. So you need to explain what you chose and why you chose it. And you need to have at least 3 references. It can include your textbook, but should also include some professional journals or other professional writing to support the intervention you chose and why you thought it would be effective. You're going to implement one intervention, but I want you to identify at least 2 other treatments that you might be able to use in case the first treatment is unsuccessful. And as I've also mentioned several times, I will deduct no points nor give you any points based on the success of your intervention. You're only earning points for being able to describe in detail what you did and being able to accurately and effectively measure those behaviors. For number 9, maintenance and generalization, you need to be thinking about how you're going to encourage the individual to maintain that behavioral improvement over time without as much intervention from you, or once your intervention ceases. And then you also, so that's maintenance, and then you need to think about how it will be generalized to other settings or with other people. So chances are you're designing an intervention where you're very actively involved in supporting the person to exhibit the target behavior or to reduce the target behavior. Moving forward, you're going to want that person to be able to take those new behavioral skills and apply them when you're not there, or if you're a classroom teacher, to apply them in other teachers' classrooms. That's what we mean by generalization. For item 10, you need to defend your project, explain why it was useful, practical, generalizable. and why you think it has the potential for having a long-range impact on the individual that you're using it with. You need to defend it. And there are some questions there that should help you in doing that, but this is your opportunity to really provide your rationale for the project that you implemented. All of your work should be done in APA format. This again is another one of those opportunities to practice your professional writing.